Hi everyone, my name is Austin Palmer. I'm the designer of Concrete Jungle, and today I'm here with a quick rules and playthrough video. Concrete Jungle is an entry to the 2022 Solitaire Print and Play contest, and in it you play an ape who has just broken out of captivity. Your goal is to traverse the city's rooftops and escape into the nearby jungles before you are recaptured by your pursuers. Today I'm in playingcards.io. I will share the link to the room code in the description of this video and also a link to the raw file in case the room ever gets deleted. This is just a little easier because I don't have a very comfortable setup for filming the actual physical game. But there's no difference between this version and the physical version with the exception of these components here. In the rules, you're told to use cubes just because these tracks use square spaces. But in the PCIO, we're just using these little sort of push pin items. They're functionally similar, but they just look a little different. So before I get into setup, I'm going to go into a description of what the various components in the game are. So like I mentioned, there are these 5 cubes or pins, which you'll use to track various values during the game. And then for the actual cards, we have first your ape card. So there are two different apes you can play as in the game, the gorilla or the orangutan. And each ape has a number of values. So you have their name, you have their starting lead, basically how far ahead of your pursuers you begin the game with. And then you have usually 2, and both have 2 skill or traits that will sort of mix up how you play the game. Some can be passive, like in this one it says keep 1 additional card in your starting hand during setup, but they can also be a little more active, give you a special ability. In this case, the long arms ability lets you skip a turn when you move to a star point. We'll get to that later on. And then finally, each ape will have their own momentum track. So your speed in the game is going to be tracked on the momentum track, and it basically refers to kind of how fast you're moving, how far a lot of actions can take you. So this other card here is the pursuit card. The top is the pursuit track, and that's where you're actually going to be tracking your lead. So for the orangutan, your lead's going to start at 5, and so you're going to start at a value of 5, but as you sort of make mistakes or lose ground during the game, your pursuers will catch up to you, and if your lead ever gets down to 0, you immediately lose the game. The other half of the pursuit card is here at the bottom right called the free fall track, and this is more of a chart than a track, but effectively whenever you sort of move into an empty point, into midair, you lose control of your actions and you sort of have to fall to the ground, and this is how you'll resolve that. And again, we'll get into that later. So these are the 2 cards you use to sort of track info, and then we also have this deck of map/skill cards, so we'll look at that now. So each map card, they're double-sided. One side will be the skill and one side will be the map itself. So each map card has a grid of 5 by 7 points. And there are 5 types of points described by this reference card here. And there are 2 broad categories of points. So solid points are points that you can kind of stand on, run across, jump to, grab to. And there are 3 kinds of solid points. Run points, this white circle with a solid black outline. Those are going to be the most common solid points in the game. Swing points, which are these little star points, those you can think of as light fixtures or flagpoles, things you can sort of swing around, or things that might have like a rope connected between, things like that. And then blocked points, these sort of circles with an X through them, represent kind of impassable barriers. Think of like a wide chain link fence or a large building that you can't get around easily. So they're going to block your movement when you try to go through them. And then empty points are the opposite of solid points in that you can't stand on them, you can't grab them, they're just empty points in space. And there are 2 types of empty points. Mid-air points, this kind of dashed black circle, and then backdrop points, this black dot, which represents kind of the side of a building as you're jumping alongside it. Mechanically, there aren't necessarily differences between any of these kinds of points, but different skills will allow you to move to different types of points. Also, when you move to an empty point, you'll have to resolve free fall, and that's where this track over here comes in. When you move into an empty point, you have to fall through the air. And then also blocked points restrict your movement in a way that I'll get to later when describing the gameplay. Also, not every point, but some points have these arrows leading from them. Those are known as basic movement arrows. You can think of those kind of dictating the natural flow of movement across the rooftops. And when you make something called basic moves, which we'll get into, this will restrict how you can make a basic move. So that's, and then finally, sorry, each map card has an anchor on each side. You can see these little half diamonds on the left and right. Those are just used to align the cards when you put them in the map. The map will be a row of 4 cards, and you'll align them based on these anchors, and we'll see how that works during setup. On the flip side of every map card, we have a skill, and skills also have a few attributes. You have the name of the skill at the top here, in this case, tightrope. At the top left, you'll have an icon, and this designates that skill's type. The sort of lightning bolt icon here is known as an action, and the other kind of icon we see in the icon reference is called a reflex. This sort of circular arrows here is a reflex. No real difference between skill types other than when you can play them. We'll get into kind of how the turn structure works and when you can play actions or reflexes at different times. But also some cards like this card here, Kong Leap, have both icons, which means they can be played as both types. Some skills will have a kind of chain link icon beneath their type, like Leap here. That means it's a fluid skill, and we'll get into what that means later. And then finally, every skill will have a number of effects. Most effects are going to move you along the map, but some can also do things like increase speed, decrease speed, manipulate the cards in your hand, things like that. So let's get into setup. So ordinarily, you would shuffle all of the map cards together, but for your starting game, it's recommended that you use the orangutan as your ape. Normally, you get to choose between the orangutan and the gorilla. First game recommended that you use the orangutan because it's a little simpler, so that's what we use. Additionally, normally in the game, to choose your starting hand, you will deal yourself 8 cards and pick 4. Or in the orangutan's 5 because you keep an additional one. But for your first game, it's recommended with the orangutan, you pick these 5 starting cards for your hand before you begin setup. So that'll be Leap, Kong Leap, Run, Air Control, and Zipline. This gives you a basic spread of good movement actions and skills so that you don't necessarily have to make this decision immediately without knowing what they mean. So this is sort of going to be what your setup looks like before you even begin setup for your very first game. This is your ape for your first game, and these are your cards for your first game. Now, let's go through the kind of ordinary version of setup. Ordinarily, in the first step, you'd pick your ape, either orangutan or gorilla, and you will place the starting cubes on these 2 cards. So both apes have this little double boxed number, and this represents where you place the momentum cube on the track to start the game. So in the orangutan's case, we place it on the 1. So we'll place a cube here. And your speed is the value next to the momentum cube. So in this case, our starting speed is actually 2, not 1. That way you always have a good visual reference of what your speed is. You don't have to remember what's under the cube itself. Similarly, because our starting lead is 5, we're going to place our starting cube next to the 5 value. Your lead is, again, the value next to the pursuit cube. In this case, we want it to be 5, so we place the actual cube itself on the 4 space. And finally, we'll place a third cube here on the kind of starting free fall track. This doesn't really have any value other than to keep it set aside near the track so that it's ready to be used. These remaining 2 cubes are going to be used for tracking your actual position on the map. So we have our player card set up, your ape card and pursuit card. So now we would set up the map itself. Ordinarily, like I said, you'd shuffle all the cards in the map deck, 16. But now we've taken these out before setup began, so we're just going to shuffle up these 11. Sorry. Shuffle this. And you're going to deal out 4 cards into a row, making sure to align those anchors with each other. So in this case, we'll drag this here. And you sort of want these to align. It's a little hard to do on this map. It's a little easier to do physically. But you can see how they're supposed to kind of align to make a little square, a little diamond. And that's how you align them with each other. So we'll do that with the other cards. And as you can see, they don't always align just sort of like top of the card to bottom of the card. So they can kind of have an incline or decline. So if you do this physically or even in PCIO, it's recommended you keep some vertical space so that you don't go off the screen or too far down. So this is going to be our starting map. And then we're going to choose our starting cards. Now, like I said, ordinarily, you would deal yourself 8 cards from this deck, pick 4 and shuffle the rest back into the deck here. But because this is our first game, we're just going to keep this set of 5. The reason it's 5, not 4, is because we're playing as the orangutan. And this is going to be our starting hand for the first game. So now that we have our starting hand and the map, we can actually decide where we want to place our ape in its starting position. So you place your active cube, basically representing where you are, on any solid point in the leftmost 2 columns of the leftmost card. So remember, solid points are either run points, swing points, or block points, which means we could place our active cube here, 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 or here. We will place it here. And then you take the final cube, the start cube, and place it above it. The start cube is going to track sort of where you were at the start of every turn. So you can just place it here. You can place it above the card. You can place it at the top, just kind of out of the way above the active cube. And now with that, we're ready to start. So the structure of the game is given a little bit by the other side of this reference card. Every turn you're either going to play an action or you're going to scramble. We'll get into scrambling later on. Basically, scrambling is sort of a worst case scenario option if you cannot play an action or if you really want to set up something on a future turn. Not recommended in general. But you're going to play an action or scramble, and then you're going to follow these 5 end of turn steps. And you're going to do that until you either escape, basically making your way through the entire map and escaping, and that's how you win. Or if your lead reaches 0, various things will cause your lead to decrease. If it ever reaches 0, you lose the game. Or if for any reason you move off the bottom of the map. So the map comprises this grid of points, but the points actually extend off past the map cards in every direction. And all the points that are not on these map cards are mid-air points, these kind of dashed black circles here. You can think of all points not on cards as those points, and they have no basic movement arrows. So these kind of extend in every direction. And if you would ever move past the bottom of a card here, you immediately lose because you fall to the ground below. So you win by escaping, making your way through the map deck, and hopefully I'll get to show you what escaping looks like. You lose by either falling off the bottom of a map, or if your lead reaches 0. So let's get started. So like I said, you can either play an action or you can scramble. And this is where the 2 different types of skill come into play. So these reflex cards can't be played as an action, they have to be played as a reflex, which means between movements. And we'll go over what movements mean when I actually play my first action for the turn. But basically, each movement is sort of a discrete, uninterruptible movement along the map. And reflexes can be played after or before resolving a movement. So this card, for example, couldn't be played as my action. But anything else could because they have that lightning icon. This, because it has both, could be played as a reflex or as an action. So for my first turn, I will play Leap, because Leap is a good example of some of the mechanics. So when you play a card, you're going to place it into your line here, and you will resolve all of its effects 1 sentence at a time. So each effect is a single sentence, and you're going to resolve those effects 1 at a time in order. Most effects are going to move you along the map, and these effects will have a number of attributes. So they will always have at least one of the 3. They'll have a strength, a value basically indicating how many points to move. They'll give you direction requirements, sort of what directions you can move. And they'll give you point requirements, sort of what points you're allowed to move to or move from. In this case, the first effect has all 3. So it says move, your speed, this icon here, this sort of in motion monkey, or sorry, in motion ape, refers to your speed when the skill is played, or when the effect is resolved more accurately. So in this case, if we played this, when we resolve this effect, our speed is 2, so this value would be 2. So the strength of this effect is 2. The possible directions we can move in are up or right. You don't have to choose the same direction both times. So we're moving to up or right, but we could move right then up, or up then right, so on and so forth. And we're moving to specifically backdrop points or mid-air points. And that does apply to all movements. So you couldn't move to a midair point and then to a solid point. Both moves would have to be to midair points or backdrop points. And then the next effect is moving one up or right, but to any kind of point. So there's no point restriction. If one of those three, strength, direction restriction, or point restriction, isn't specified, there is no restriction on it. So you resolve these effects one at a time, and ordinarily, each sentence that moves you along the map is considered a movement. Like I said, a movement is a discrete, uninterruptible motion along the map. And that's important because first, reflexes have to be played after a movement is resolved or before a movement is resolved. So, for instance, if we're moving to right or up, we couldn't play a reflex while doing those two movements. We have to wait until we finish them. And also, you only check for free fall and fall through the air after you've finished completing a movement. So, like I said, ordinarily, this one sentence, move to up or right to midair or backdrop points, that would be its own movement. There are two exceptions to this. One is basic moves, and we'll get into that a little later. But the second exception is that icon in the top left, that chain link icon. That means the skill is fluid. So a fluid skill means that all of its movement effects are resolved as a single movement. So ordinarily, each sentence would be its own movement, meaning between this first sentence and this second sentence, we could play a reflex or we would have to resolve free fall, anything like that. But now it's not. Because it's fluid, everything is resolved, and then we check for free fall, then we can play reflexes, stuff like that. So let me show you what I mean. So this says move to up or right to empty points only, midair or backdrop. There's only one way we could resolve that from here, which is moving right and then moving right again. Because if we moved up at any point, that would be to a run point, which is not allowed. So we have to move here and we have to move here. Now, if you end a movement on an empty point, midair or backdrop, you have to resolve free fall. We won't go over that just yet. We'll do that in a minute or two. But just know that it basically means you lose control of your motion and you just fall along the map until you hit a solid point. However, because this is fluid, we're not done with our movement, so we don't check for free fall yet. Instead, we resolve the rest of it, which is move one up or right to any point. So theoretically, we could move up to this solid point, or we could move right to this midair point. But the rest of this skill says you must move up at least once, and you cannot move up more than right. So we've moved nothing but right with the first two moves on the map. So this last one has to be up in order to fulfill this requirement. So we go right 2 for the first sentence, up 1, and that's the end of the movement. So now is when we would check for free fall. Of course, we're not actually on an empty point anymore, we're on a solid point, so we don't have to do free fall, but we could play a reflex. So a reflex you can play at any time before or after resolving a movement, so we're going to do that here. And this is Kong Leap. It could be played as an action or a reflex. We're going to play it as a reflex. So we'll play it just like a regular card, and it says make one basic move, right or sort of downright diagonal, to a point with a backdrop or midair, an empty point directly above it. So this gets us into what basic moves are. So when you make a basic move, one basic move, you're moving one point, and you have to move in a direction given by the basic movement arrows of the point you're on. So in this case, the point we're on only has one basic movement arrow, and it moves to the right. So the only point we can move is from here to here. Let's say if we were over here, we could either move here, the right arrow, or we could move here from the up diagonal arrow. Additionally, all the arrows on this card are what are called normal arrows, but there are different types of basic movement arrows. And the first time you move along an arrow every turn, you have to resolve that arrow's effect. So there are 4 different types of movement arrows. You have normal arrows, they don't have any effect at all. Slow arrows, the ones on say this card, they will cause you to reduce your momentum by 1. The fast arrows, these sort of double arrows here, will increase your momentum by 1, and tight movement arrows will decrease your speed by 1. So now might be a good time to go over increasing and decreasing momentum, increasing and decreasing speed. So when told to increase momentum by 1 or decrease, you will move the momentum cube right 1 if you're increasing momentum, or down 1 if you're decreasing momentum. If you get to the end and have to decrease or increase further, you just don't do it anymore. Also, if you have to decrease momentum and you end at the leftmost space, you have to lose 1 lead. So if for some reason if we were here and we had to decrease momentum by 1, we would end here, which means we decrease our lead by 1, but we're not at that point yet. Similarly, increasing momentum brings you here, and that's how your speed can change. So right now our speed's at 2, but if for some reason we decreased momentum by 1, our speed would change to 1. And that's what these are about. So increasing, decreasing speed is the same, except you decrease momentum until your speed changes. So for instance, let's say some effect tells us to increase our speed by 1. Our current speed is 2, so we would move the cube forward until our speed was 3. So we move it 1, our speed's still 2, 1, now our speed is 3, so we'd stop here. Similarly, if our speed was 3, and we wanted to decrease it until it reached 2, we'd simply decrease our momentum until our speed is 2, which would just be that. And similarly, if you were, say, at speed 1, but needed to decrease speed, you would just not move any further. But because you would end at this spot, you'd have to decrease your lead. So that's how increasing, decreasing momentum and speed work. But we don't have to worry about any of that because our basic movement's this way, and it is on a normal basic movement arrow, so we don't have to worry about any of these effects. However, we have moved 1, and we ended at a midair point. This is a valid movement because it has an empty point directly above it, so we're fine. But at the end of this movement, if we wanted to, we could resolve another reflex, air control here. And yeah, I think I will do this just for the purposes of explaining the game, because you can play as many reflexes as you want in your turn. Actions you only play 1 of, but you can play as many reflexes as sort of dictated by the restrictions on the card. So in this case, air control says move 1 from some empty point which we're on. So this we could move from here, and it says this counts as part of the previous movement, not its own movement. And that's important for a reason that we will get to shortly. So we'll play that. We've ended this movement. So we play air control, which says move 1 from an empty point. So we could move 1 in any direction because it doesn't specify a direction. So we could technically just move back, but there's no point doing that. So for the purpose of illustration, I'll move up here. This is going to be a bad idea, and we'll see why soon. But I'm going to move up 1, and that's where my movement ends. And this counts as part of the previous movement, not its own movement, and that's important for free fall, which is what we're getting into right now. So you're going to be resolving these movements, either a skill or a fluid skill or an effect or a basic move. But after a movement, any kind of movement, if you end on an empty point, you have to resolve free fall. And what does that mean? Well, first you're going to check how far horizontally that movement was. So in this case, we moved right 1 and then up 1, but the actual horizontal distance is only 1, so the horizontal distance traveled by that movement was 1. If we had, say, used air control to move here, then our distance would actually be 2, but because we moved up, it's only 1. And you're going to place the free fall cube on that space at the top of the track. So we're going to place it at the top of the 1 space, and then here's where the actual movements come in. And you're going to resolve these 3 steps over and over again until you reach a solid point. So first you're going to move right the number of spaces under the cube in this row. So in this case it says move right 1. And importantly, for the purposes of playing reflexes or for anything else, that is considered a separate movement. So if we did that, but then still had a reflex that could be played, we could then play it after resolving that rightward movement. That won't come up very often. Kind of air control is really the only card that can move you in midair, but it's worth mentioning just for now. So you move right 1, and then you move down the value in the sort of down row in that column. So we'll move down 1. Then you move right, you move down, then you move the cube 1 space to the left, or if you're already in this column, you can't move it, so you just keep it there. And if the cube is in a space with an X on it, you can see these X's printed in the leftmost 2 columns, you have to lose 1 lead. Essentially at this point, you're kind of falling down more than you're falling forward, so you have to lose 1 lead. So our lead decreases to 4. And this is why it wasn't really smart to do what I just did with air control, because it caused us to lose our lead. But you would keep doing that until you finally hit a solid point. So we move right 1, and then we've hit a solid point, so we're done. We don't have to resolve the downward, we don't have to keep moving, we're just done, and free fall's over. However, yeah, let's describe it now. So, yeah, let's describe it now. So, if at any point you need to resolve a movement on a skill during free fall, anything like that, but you can't, that movement's called an invalid movement. And for any sort of skill effect that would do this, you don't resolve any of that movement. You lose all effects of the effect that you're resolving. You can't play any more reflexes. You skip directly to end of turn, and you have to decrease your lead by whatever your speed value is. So, actually, I'll go into that in the next turn. But so anyway, ignore what I just said. We played leap. That was our action for the turn. We played a reflex, Kong leap, which moved us here. We played air control, which moved us up 1, and then we resolved free fall, which brought us here. So if we had any more reflexes, we could play them. We don't, we just have actions left. So instead we jump to end of turn, and end of turn is 5 steps. The first step is adjusting momentum. So you're going to count the distance between your active cube and your start cube. That's why we have this here, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you're going to compare that to your current speed. If the distance is greater than your current speed, you increase momentum by 1. Otherwise, you decrease momentum. So if you haven't moved further than your current speed, you actually lose momentum. Then, step 2 is adjust the map. So you will check to see if there's any cards that you've kind of completely passed over. In this case, we have 1. And you're going to shift the map and remove that card. So this card's going to go into the experience pile. And we're going to shift all the cards to the left and replace them with new ones from the deck. So we'll replace this one so that there's 4 cards. If there's not enough cards in the map deck, then you just replace as many as you can. So that's updating the map, is basically placing any passed over cards into the experience pile and then updating the map so there's 4 cards. Then you move the start cube above your active cube, sort of resetting for the next turn. Then step 4 is Pursuer's Advance. So you're going to count how many cards you have in your hand, in this case 2, and how many cards are in play. That's the total number of cards in your line and the total number of cards in the map. So we have 4 cards in the map, 3 in the line, so there are 7 cards in play. And if there are ever as many or more cards in your hand as in play, you have to lose 1 lead. You can think of this as if you're kind of going too slowly with your actions, then your pursuers are starting to catch up to you. In this case, we don't have to worry because there's 7 against 2, it's not even close. But if, for instance, you had 8 cards in hand in this scenario, then you would have to decrease your lead by 1. And then finally, step 5 is reset line. If your hand is empty, then you would reset your line. Our hand's not empty, so we'll get to that later. So now that we've done all these steps, we go on to the next turn. And again, we can either play an action or we can scramble. So now I'm going to go back to what I was talking about with invalid movements. So let's say for our turn, for some reason, we thought it would be a good idea to play zipline. It's not a good idea to play zipline, I'll explain why. So let's say we played that. Now, most effects are mandatory. You have to resolve it exactly as it says. So in this case, leap, it said move or speed up or right. You couldn't move less than that. You had to move exactly 2. However, there are 2 exceptions. If something says may, that entire effect is optional. So this may move 1 to a swing point, that's an optional effect. Also, if something says up to, you have to resolve that effect, but it can be lower to the value given. So if this had said, move up to 2 points, you could have moved 1 or 2. But normally you have to resolve it. So this first sentence, there's no problem. You may move 1 to a swing point. Now, that would be great if there were any swing points to move to, 1 point away, but there aren't. So we'd love to do that, but we can't. That's not a problem, except for this next sentence. This next sentence says move from a swing point to any lower swing point on the next map card. And that's not optional, you have to do it. However, we can't do that because we're not on a swing point. We can't move from a swing point because we're not on it. So this effect here would be known as an invalid movement. If you ever run into an invalid movement, you don't resolve that movement at all, and you skip any effects of the card. So we'd skip the move 1, we'd skip the burying, and you wouldn't be able to play any reflexes, and you'd skip directly to the end of turn steps. And you would have to lose your lead equal to your current speed. So if we did play this zip line, we would run into an invalid movement. We'd move not at all, and then we'd have to decrease our lead by 2, which is our current speed. Luckily, we're not going to play this because that would be very dumb. We wouldn't move at all. We're just going to keep this in our hand. The only exception in this invalid movement case is with free fall. So if you ever have an invalid movement in free fall, let's say you're up here and you need to move down 2. You can only move down 1 because you have to move to empty points. So that would be invalid. Normally you would resolve none of it, but in free fall you resolve as much as you can. So you still decrease your lead, but you just move until you hit a solid point. You can think of it as kind of crashing into the ground there. So if you're resolving a skill effect, you wouldn't resolve any part of the invalid movement. If you are free falling, then you will resolve as much as you can until you hit a solid point. But we're not going to do the invalid movement. We're not going to play that card. That's a dumb idea. Instead, we're going to play run. So run says make speed plus 1 basic moves to solid points. You know, run point, swing point, or block point, that's any solid point. And our speed in this case is 2. So it says make 3 basic moves to solid points. And it has to be exactly 3. We can't do less, we can't do more. So I'm going to move here, that's 1, that's the only basic move we can make. Go here, that's 2. And then I'll go up just to illustrate. So we're up here now. That's 1, 2, 3 basic moves. We have no reflexes we want to play, so we go to end of turn. So first step is adjust momentum. Our horizontal distance between start and active cube is 2, 2 points. And our current speed is 2. Since we haven't moved more than our speed, we have to decrease momentum. So we decrease that back down. Our speed's still at 2, but we're getting close to this space where we'd have to lose our lead. But that's step 1. Step 2 is update map. We haven't passed over any cards, so we don't have to worry about it. Step 3 is move the start cube. We'll do this. Pursuers advance. Again, we don't have to worry about that. The number of cards in play is 8, and there's 1 card in our hand. And reset line, we still have a card in our hand, so we don't have to worry. So we just continue to the next turn. And here's where scrambling comes into play. So, like I said, if we played this zip line, because we're not close to any swing points, this would be an invalid movement. We wouldn't move anywhere. We would have to decrease our lead by 2, bringing us very close to losing. And we'd also be decreasing our momentum at end of turn because we hadn't moved anywhere. And that's definitely less than ideal. So instead, we're going to scramble. Scrambling is generally a worst case scenario situation. You want to avoid doing it at all costs. But if you can't play an action, or if any actions you could play would be invalid, it might be your best option. So when you scramble, you first decrease your lead by 1, because you're moving very slowly, giving them time to catch up. And then you're going to bury a card from your hand. So burying a card means that you take a card, place it at the bottom of the deck, like so. Oh, no! So sorry. Oof. Oh wait, you can do this. Okay, so you're going to place it at the bottom of the deck. That's not working at all. You place it at the bottom of the deck, and then you're going to take the top card of the map deck and place it skill side up in your line. It doesn't matter if you bury from your hand or your line, the new card always goes to your line so that you don't get to recycle cards infinitely into your hand. So we decreased lead by 1, we buried a card, placing it at the bottom of the deck and replacing that card with the top card of the map deck, and then you get to make 1 basic move. So like I said, scrambling is really generally a bad idea, especially in this case because we don't get to move to an empty point. If I was here and we'd moved here, at least we could have resolved some free fall and maybe gotten over to here. Unfortunately, I made the wrong choice and we're up here. So we get to make 1 basic move that's here, which is pretty bad. So that's scrambling. You bury a card, decrease your lead by 1, and make 1 basic move. So that's our whole turn. And also, sorry, if you scramble, you cannot play reflexes on your turn. So you can only do the scramble and then you go directly to end of turn. You don't get to play any reflexes if any are valid. So we've done our scrambling, so we skip to the end of turn. Step 1, adjust momentum. We moved 1, which is less than our current speed, so we decrease this. And since we ended at this leftmost space, that also decreases our lead. So our lead is at 2, which is not great. Then we would update the map. We don't need to because we haven't passed over any cards. Step 3 is move the start cube, which we do above our active cube. Step 4, Pursuer's Advance. Again, we don't have to worry about that. And then step 5, reset line. So now that our hand is empty, we are going to reset our line. To do that, you take all the cards in the experience pile. In this case, we only have 1. And you look at all of them, again, only 1, and you choose 1 to add to your line. If we had any others, which we don't, they would all go to this discard pile skill side up. They're out of the game permanently. And then once you've done that, you add all the cards in your line back into your hand. So now we have 6 cards in our hand as opposed to 5. Now that's the end of step 5, reset line. So now we're ready to continue to our next turn. This might be a good time to look at our our traits. Like they haven't really come into play yet, but they could in the future. So highly intelligent has already happened. We kept 1 additional card in our starting hand. Normally you will have 4 in your starting hand, but the orangutan starts with 5. And then long arms. Once per turn, when you move to a swing point, you may skip 1 card. So when you skip a card, you get to place a card from your hand directly into your line. So if you have a card that you won't think it will get played this sort of go through your hand, or if you're just trying to avoid pursuers advancing at the end of turn, this will be a very good thing. The opposite of that, vaulting a card, means you return a card from your line to your hand, which could be helpful if you have a really good card in your line that you want to play again. But generally, it will make pursuers more likely to advance because more cards in your hand means more likely to have the pursuers advance towards you. So this won't come up soon because we're not near any swing points, but it's worth bringing up in the future. So now on our turn we have 6 cards to play. We can't play air control, it's not an action, but we can play any other card because it's an action. So what do we want to do? And our speed now is only 1, so we're not getting a lot of great options here. Let's play the card we got from resetting our line, which is Knuckle Walk. So Knuckle Walk is very simple. It just make basic moves equal to your speed, and this has no direction and it has no point restriction. So we can make basic movements at like any kind to any kind of point. They just have to be basic moves. So this generally will only let us move 1. Knuckle Walk's better for kind of moving off into space, so you can resolve free fall and get some extra movement. But we'll play it a little inefficiently now, and we'll make 1 basic move, and that basic move goes to here. Now we don't want to decrease our momentum again, which we would have to do because we only moved 1 point. So we'll play a Kong Leap as a reflex. We just resolved a movement, a single basic move, and now we're going to play another skill, in this case a reflex. In this, we've seen this before, make a basic move right or down right to a point with an empty point directly above it. So in this case we can only move right, so we'll do that. The only other reflex is air control now, and air control has to be done from a empty point which we're not on. So we have no more reflexes to play, so we'll do end of turn. We'll adjust momentum. 2 is greater than 1, so we increase momentum by 1. We adjust the map, so we finally cleared this card, so we can put it in the experience pile and shift all these cards over to the left. Do that. Shift. Shift. And then shift. So we've updated the map. Step 3 is move the start cube. Step 4 is Pursuer's Advance. Now, this is a little closer, right? We have 4 cards in our hand, and we have 6 cards in play. If we hadn't played this Kong Leap, then we'd have an equal number of cards in our hand and in play, which means we'd have to decrease our lead. So it's a good thing we played this reflex, because otherwise we would have had to decrease our lead, which means we would have been 1 point away from losing. So, but luckily, 6 number of cards in play is greater than 4. We don't have to worry about that. And then finally, reset line doesn't apply because we have cards in our hand. So we're on to the next turn. Our speed is now 2, which is good, but it's still not ideal. Let's play run. So we've seen run before, make speed +1 basic moves to solid points. Our speed is 2, so we can make 3 basic moves. So our first basic move will be to here. Our second basic move will be here. But because we hit this slow basic movement arrow, we have to decrease our momentum by 1. Unfortunately, we decrease our momentum, and we end in this leftmost spot, so we have to decrease our lead now. But that's only 2 of our basic moves. Our third basic move brings us here. We're also going across another basic slow arrow, but you only resolve them once per turn, so we don't have to resolve it again, luckily, or else we'd lose. So we've done that. Our only reflex is air control. We can't play it on a solid point, so we do end of turn. Adjust momentum. 3 is actually more than 2, so, well, 3 is more than 1, so we get to increase our momentum again. We update the map, haven't passed over anything, move the start cube. Don't need to worry about pursuers advancing because we have more cards in play than in hand, and then we don't reset our line because we still have cards in our hand. So next turn, what do? We can either dive. We haven't seen this one before. So dive says move speed +1 to the right. You cannot move to points with an up basic arrow, and during free fall, if you land on an empty point, you skip the first movement rightward. So ordinarily, if you do free fall, you'll do a movement right, then movement down. If you dive, you skip that first movement rightward and just move down. So that could be interesting. Let's play dive, I think. So move speed +1 right, not moving to points with an up basic arrow. Our speed is 2, so we're moving 3 points to the right. And we can do this because none of these points to the right have basic movement arrows at all, much less ones upward. So we'll move 1, 2, 3. Now, this is the end of the movement, so we could play this air control if we want to. And I think we do want to. Let's not play it. So we're not going to play air control. So we have ended a movement on an empty point, so we just resolve free fall. So the movement we've done is 1, 2, 3 from our most recent point. So we would put the cube on the 3 spot. Ordinarily, our first movement would be 3 to the right, but dive specifically says you skip that. So we would skip that and do just the movement downward, which is 1. That brings us to a solid point, so we end free fall entirely. We don't have to lose any lead. We don't have to do anything like that because we were able to fully resolve it, but we do end free fall, and so we skip to end of turn. Adjust momentum. Once again, 3 is greater than 2, so we get to bop that up. We get to place this card in the experience pile and move this here. Wait, here, sorry. 1, 2, 3, yeah, here. Place the start cube above it. Reset the map. Pursuers advance, nothing to worry about, and then we still have cards in our line, so we don't have to worry about that either. So on our next turn, the only thing we can do is play leap. We could technically scramble, but that would cause us to instantly lose the game, so we're going to play leap instead. Move equal to your speed up or right, so that's 2, to an empty points, and then move 1 to the right or up. You have to move up at least once, but you can't move up more than right. So in this case, the only valid kind of configuration is moving up 1 and then right 2. We couldn't start with rightward movement because that would be to solid points, and if we moved 2 up, that would be more up than right. So we go 1, 1, 2. And then we will play, so we've done both effects, and that's the end of the movement, and so we are going to play air control here. So move 1 from an empty point, we're going to move, so we started here, and we're going to move here. We're going to move diagonally upright to here, and remember this isn't its own movement, it's just part of this movement. So that matters in terms of resolving free fall, which we're doing now. So we count our horizontal distance because we landed on an empty point, so we're doing free fall. So the horizontal distance moved in that movement is 1, 2, 3. Because remember this and this count as the same movement. So we place this cube on the 3 space. And then we're just going to resolve it until we hit a solid point. So we move 1, 2, 3. Remember all the spaces above and below the map and to the left and right are mid-air points, so they're empty. Then we move down 1. Then we move the cube to the left. Then we do it again. So it's the values below are 2 and then 1. So we go 1, 2 right, down 1. And then we move this to the left again. We go 1 right. We've hit a solid point, so we're done. Don't have to lose any lead, don't have to do anything else. We finish resolving free fall, no cards in our hand, so we go to end of turn. We moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points, far more than 2, so that increases our momentum. And now our speed's at 3. We adjust the map, so both of these cards we've passed over, so they go to the experience pile. And we slide all these cards over. Sorry, it's a little hard to line these up. All right, so back to 4 cards. Move the start cube up above your active cube. Pursuer's advance, we have no cards in hand, so we don't have to worry about that. And then finally reset our line. And this we do because we're out of cards in hand. So we take all the cards in our experience pile, we add them to our hand. We choose one and we're going to discard the rest. So roll, make a basic move, those directions, skid, Let's keep skid. So we'll place skid in our line, and the rest of the cards will go to this discard pile up in the top right. And then we will add all these cards back to our hand and continue with the next turn. So at this point, maybe you're wondering, why are we doing this? You're doing this because you want to escape the city, and you do that by making it all the way through this map deck. Ordinarily, and this wouldn't come up very often, but ordinarily, if you were ever to move past this rightmost card, like if you somehow in one turn moved all the way here and tried to move more, it's invalid, as long as there's cards still left in this map deck. However, if this map deck is empty, then any movement off the rightmost card into the right here immediately wins you the game because you escape into the jungles and they can't find you. So remember that this space, if the map deck is empty, is all mid-air points. So to win the game, you need to make your way to the final card, no cards left in the map deck, and then find a way to leap yourself into empty points, or mid-air points specifically, and that will win you the game. You don't have to resolve free fall, you don't have to resolve end of turn effects. As soon as you get off that rightmost card, you win the game. So we're getting close, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 map cards left. But we are also 1 point away from losing. And also, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cards in hand, and only 4 cards in play. So we have to play at least 2 cards this turn, or our pursuers will catch up to us, we'll lose our final lead, and lose the game. So we're in a tight spot, but it's definitely doable. I think I'll finish the game out. Sorry, this has been taking a long time, but I'm going to finish the game out and just sort of show the game from beginning to end. So on our turn, we can play an action. Can't play this, but we can play anything else. What would we want to do? Let's do something a little more complicated to sort of show the flexibility of the movement system. So we're going to play dive. Move speed +1 to the right. and skip the first movement right during free fall. So our speed is 3, so we're going to move 4 points right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're in an empty point, a backdrop point, so we resolve free fall. Our distance between our most recent point and our current point is 4, so we place it here. Ordinarily, we'd move 4 to the right, but instead we skip that and we just do 1 down. Ooh, that was a bad decision. So instead, before we move 1 down, after resolving our dive movement, I'm going to play air control. I made a mistake when I was calculating that. Air control, you can move 1 in any direction, so we're just going to move here instead. So we would have resolved free fall, but because of air control, we were able to get to that higher point. We're no longer on an empty point, so we don't have to resolve free fall at all. But we're not quite done yet, because I'm also going to play Kong Leap. So Kong Leap, we've seen move 1 basic right or down right, and we're going to move here. So the point has an empty point above it, so we make 1 basic move here, and because we ended an empty point, we resolve free fall. Distance is 1 because it's its own movement, so we move 1 right and end here. So we've played 1 action, 2 reflexes, and we've ended over here, and now we don't have any more reflexes to play, so we can just go directly to end of turn. Adjust momentum, far more than 3, so we can increase our speed. Adjust the map. Place the start cube. Pursuers advance. We have 4 cards in hand, but luckily we have 7 cards in play, so we don't have to worry about that. And then we reset the line, but our hand is not empty. So on to the next turn. Let's play. Let's play Skid. So Skid is a new one. It says you cannot play reflexes this turn. You can't really control your movement because you're skidding along the ground. And it says make up to speed plus 1 basic moves right or down right. So make up to means that we have to do at least 1, but we could do fewer if we want. So if a third basic move would be invalid, we don't have to take it. We can just do 2. Ignore slow and tight basic movement effects. Basically, anything that would slow you down doesn't. And also, if you resolve free fall this turn, you skip any remaining movements. So if a basic move moved you into the air and you fell, you don't keep skidding, you would just stop for that turn. So we're making up to 3 plus 1, so 4 basic moves, because our speed is 3. So we'll make 1, and we don't really have a lot of choices here, so we're just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to over here. And also, this first arrow here is a fast arrow. If you remember, the fast movement effect is increasing momentum by 1. So we get to move here. That increases momentum by 1. We don't resolve it for any of the other movement arrows, so we'll do 2, 3. We could go down here to this swing point, but we have no real way to get out of it on the future turn, so we'll just go over to here, and that's our turn. No more reflexes, so we'll do end of turn. Adjust momentum, 4 greater than 3. Getting up to being very fast, our speed is 4 now. Update the map. Slide these over. And so now the map deck's empty, so all we have to do is get all the way over to this card and then find a way to move off it into empty points. And once we do that, we immediately win the game. So we're getting close. So we updated our map, placing the start cube. Pursuers don't advance, don't have to reset our line, so we do the next turn. And let's play Leap. So move speed upper right to empty points, and then move 1 upper right. So Normally we've kind of just been doing this moving up one and then right the rest of the way, but we're going to do it a little different this time. So speed upper right, our speed is 4, so we're going to move up 2, 1, 2. Remember this is sort of a mid-air point right above it, and then right 2, so 1, 2. And then for the final movement, this move 1, we're going to move right. We couldn't move up because then we'd be moving more up than right, so we're here. We ended, and this is, again, because it's a fluid skill, it's one continuous movement, so we couldn't have played reflexes or resolved free fall in between those sentences. But now that we finished the whole movement, we now resolve free fall. So the distance between our starting point and our current point is 3. So we place the free fall cube here. Our first motion is 3 to the right, so 1, 2, 3. And our second motion is 1 down, so we move 1 down, and we end here. So we end cleanly, don't have to lose lead, we don't have to lose, and instead we don't have any reflexes to play, so we go to end of turn, and we do all the same stuff we've been doing. Adjust momentum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, greater than 4, so we keep going up. We can adjust the map. And now at this point, we wouldn't refill the map because there's no cards to refill. We're getting closer and closer to victory. Move the star cube, we did. Pursuers don't advance. And we reset our line, but we don't have to. So now we're on to our next turn. I don't want to play run because run would be invalid. We have to make our basic moves to solid points, and it has to be exactly, in this case, 5. But if we moved one basic move, it would immediately sort of end us because then we couldn't make one to a solid point. So instead I'll play Knuckle Walk. And Knuckle Walk is simply make speed basic moves. So make 4. So let's do that. We'll go here. That's our first basic move. We'll go here for our second basic move. And free fall, it's kind of easy to internalize the free fall after a while. Just think of it as however horizontally you move that far forward, that far down, and then you start moving less and less down until eventually you're moving 1 point forward, 2 points down, and so on and so forth. But in this case, we moved 1, so we put the cube on 1, we move 1 right, 1 down. So we ended free fall, but we still have 2 basic moves left to make. So the only basic move we can make here is here. Once again, we have to resolve free fall. So we go 1 right, 1 down. And then we have a final basic move, and we can do the same thing. Move right here. We resolve free fall. We just move 1 right, and we're good to go. Oh, no. Oh, okay. So we don't have any more reflexes to play, and we don't have to resolve any more free fall, so we do end of turn. Adjust momentum. We moved a lot further than 4, so we increase that. Update the map. Nothing. We don't need to slide over because there's no more cards. Pursuers don't advance, and we don't have to reset our line. Now, here's where we basically just lose. And that's because the only card we can play is run. Unfortunately, we can't scramble because scrambling would require us to decrease our lead, which would cause us to lose. So we have to play run. Fortunately, run would require us to make 5 basic moves, all to solid points. However, our first basic move would be to here, our second basic move would be to here, and we couldn't make a third basic move because it would be invalid. So instead we would cancel all of the remaining movements, and we'd have to lose or decrease our lead equal to our speed. So we'd have to lose our 4 lead, which with only 1 lead remaining means we immediately are recaptured and we lose right at the very end, which is very much a bummer. But if, say, let's say we made our way up to here and we were here, then all we would have to do is make a move into a empty point. So we could say Kong Leap, which basic moves us into a point here, which is empty. We could leap, where's that leap, which would leap us up and then right, and then we'd win. Dive would do the same thing. As long as you can move into a mid-air point and move off the right card, you immediately win the game because you escape. So I think that's it. Thank you for keeping with me for this long. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope this was helpful in learning the game and understanding some of the mechanics. If you have any other questions, you can obviously leave a comment, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I hope you enjoy the game. Cheers.